So again, I want to thank everybody for coming today. My name is Kathy Turner. I work at the Center for Teaching and Learning. I've been there for about 15 years. And one of the reasons that I am the person presenting about teaching evaluations is that I am the person who works with folks who administer the teaching evaluations to get them running. But I also, before I started working here, I worked for about 10 years at a small liberal arts college in northeastern Pennsylvania called College Misericordia. Well, at the time it was called College Misericordia. Now it's called Misericordia University. And there I read a lot of teaching portfolios, and I sort of saw the other side, what it's like as a faculty person reading these teaching evaluations. So I'm here today to talk to you about how to present your teaching evaluations in your teaching portfolio. And I want to start by saying not every job ad asks for teaching evaluations. Those that do ask for them as part of what they talk about as evidence of teaching effectiveness or teaching portfolio. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But given that your teaching evaluations are not going to be the only thing that you might have in that teaching portfolio, I want you to always think about some of the advice that I'm giving you as applying to the larger teaching portfolio as well. So as I tell you here in my little subtitle, I'm going to give you 4 tips today, and I'm going to talk through 3 situations. And I'll also attach all these slides to the chat in the end, so you can have the slides. And I'll talk to you about how to get this information as well. All right, so tip number 1, and this is actually kind of 2 tips. First, read the advertisement. And second, do what it says. So if the advertisement doesn't mention teaching evaluations, or if it doesn't say anything about them, don't throw together a big set of teaching evaluations. No matter how great your teaching evaluations are, don't put them in. How do ads ask for teaching evaluations? There's lots of different things that they say, as you can see here. There's some sort of really super general things like evidence of teaching effectiveness, a teaching portfolio. Those things can include your teaching evaluations. And if you have teaching evaluations, they certainly should. A teaching portfolio with a sampling of materials. Or they might be super specific, as you see in the 4th one here, a teaching portfolio of 20 pages, including a teaching statement, diversity statement, a sample syllabus, and also teaching evaluations. There's also the next one that has evidence of teaching excellence, preferably in the form of teaching evaluations, or the most teaching evaluation centric question that I saw. I flipped through some job ads yesterday, a complete set of teaching evaluations or other evidence demonstrating potential excellence, and things like that. So the ads ask for a lot of different things, and you should feel free to include as much or as little of your teaching evaluations depending on what the job is asking for, particularly if they're limiting the number of pages that you can do. So then I want to talk about 3 situations that you might find yourself in. The first one is you have evaluations and they're just fine. The second one is that you have evaluations and they're maybe kind of mixed, or they're even not great. And the third one is you don't have evaluations at all. So I'm going to use these 3 situations to organize the conversation that I'm getting ready to have with you all. I want to say there are a lot of people in this session, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't stop me and ask questions. It'll probably be easier if you either use the chat or you raise your hand. I've got my screen set right now so that I can see if you're raising your hands or if you're using the chat. And I will try to stop and answer questions as we move through. But the other thing I want to say is, if I'm talking about a situation that is not the situation that you're in, I might still give you something from the tip that's going to be useful for whatever situation you're in. And finally, I want to say, not everybody is going to be in one of these 3 situations, and I'm happy to talk about other ways of talking about teaching evaluations. Situation number 1, you have teaching evaluations, and they're mostly okay. This situation covers a lot of ground. You may have a few, maybe only 1 or 2 semesters, or you might have a lot. You've done a lot of adjunct work. You've worked both at Penn and other institutions. They may be from, as I say here, different institutions. They may be for different classes, or classes for which, like, describing you as a TA doesn't fully like talk about the range of responsibilities that you have. So for this situation, and really for everything else, I want to talk about tip number 2. Have a cover page that puts your evaluations into context. This is really, really important. As I say, I want to talk here about the cover page that puts your evaluations in context. And that context can be just the facts of the matter, but later I might talk a little bit more about some ways of reflecting that might be helpful as well. All right, so let's talk about that cover page. What should you include? I want to start with the first, and this is so important, and it's also something that you really often forget. Talk about the scale you were evaluated on. At Penn, we're evaluated from the 0 to 4 scale. Most other institutions do 1 to 5, right? So your 3.5 at Penn is amazing. Your 3.5 for those other institutions, if you don't put it into context, they're like, oh, that's okay. So you do want to make sure you talk about what the scale is. You also want to talk about what classes you are available for. Were you the instructor, or were you just a TA? You may also want to include what the level of the class was, and you might want to put the numbers into context if that helps your case. So for example, at Penn, our evaluations often show you the average of all the other classes like your class, or the average of all the other TAs. And if your number looks good, then you might want to share that information. As we'll see in a minute, I've got a TA, a sample TA from somebody who shows the standard deviation. That would really depend on the extent to which you think your audience can understand what a standard deviation is. But if there are numbers there that are going to help you look good, but also put things in context, that's really smart to include. So here's the sample from the Academic Job Handbook. And I want to say the Academic Job Handbook is a text that is super easy to get. If you go to the Penn libraries, there's an electronic copy, and it's any number of people can borrow it. So I really want to recommend the Academic Job Handbook, and I'll give you a link to it at the end of this meeting. So here is the teaching evaluation summary. This would be the cover page from this person, Bethany Scholar. And as you can see, she's TA'd for a bunch of different undergraduate classes. And she provides an average across all of the different classes. She doesn't talk about in any detail how she created that average. She may have just taken all 6 classes, taken their average and divided by 6. She may have taken all the students. I don't know what she did. But she doesn't go into any detail here. But she also talks here about, oh yeah, thank you, Diane, about the standard deviation as well here. And you see, she shows you the overall rating. 1 is poor and 5 to excellent. And she brings up 2 numbers, the overall rating that she got and the helpfulness outside of class. Another nice thing that she does here is she picks up some comments from her general comments is how she does it. I might say selected comments if you're not using all the comments students have ever given about you. And one question that people always ask me about this is, what do I do with negative comments, right? If you've got comments that are really, really negative, you might want to say selected comments and say, full set available upon request. Don't be too nervous about doing that. But here you can see that Bethany included some that are very, very positive. Always prompt to read emails, very nice, friendly, helpful, enthusiastic, like all these great things. But there's some things that are, maybe less than great, hard grader. Some students saying, I didn't get to know her very well, things like that. So she didn't cherry pick only the positive comments. She included a nice general range here. And I think that's useful to start thinking about. Situation 2. Your teaching evaluations are mixed or not great. All right. So again, I want to go back to don't misrepresent yourself. If you've got nothing but bad teaching evaluations and they're asking you for teaching evaluations, don't try to fudge it in any kind of way. They will find out. I mean, there are lots of different ways that people can find your teaching evaluations. They may look at some of the online places like Rate My Professor if they don't see any numbers at all from you. So you do want to make sure that you bring up your numbers. But, and here's the good news, tip number 3, the faculty reading your evaluations have gotten bad student evaluations. All of them have, or are skeptical about the value of student evaluations. So it is worth remembering first that faculty know that student evaluations are biased. They're biased for like big classes, big science classes get lower ratings than small literature seminars. They know that they're biased against women. They know that they're biased against people of color. Faculty already know that, and you don't have to make excuses for that. The second thing is that they know that the last 2 years have been really tough. So if you got bad evaluations over the last 2 years, all you need to say is like, my evaluations were low in the spring of 2020 because students were frustrated with the sudden shift to online. Faculty have been there too, and they get it. And finally, you do not have to apologize or wring your hands about bad evaluations. What you do need to do, though, is reflect on what you've gotten from reading student evaluations, because in many ways, reading and being thoughtful about how you respond to student evaluations is exactly what faculty are looking for. They recognize that you're new to teaching, that you're still learning, but if you show them evidence, I read my evaluations and here's how I'm thinking about responding, they are going to really appreciate that. So, for example, you might reflect on what happened in this way. Students found my grading standards very high and worried that they couldn't reach them. This course, however, is a place where students meet the rigors of our field for the first time. And so as a result of reading these evaluations, I'm going to do some other things, and this is critical, again, because your readers are people who are really interested in your field, and they want you to teach students and help them learn in the field, right? I'm going to help students meet those rigors in different ways. I'm not going to make the course easier. So reflect on what happened, reflect on why things went wrong, but be aware that you don't have to apologize or you don't have to say, I'm going to go easier on students, right? I think that's a really useful thing to remember. And that this kind of reflection is incredibly helpful. And you can put this in your cover letter. It's a really short little paragraph, right? Here's another thing that Bethany Scholar did. She divided up her undergraduate courses and her graduate courses. And her comments for her graduate courses were not as positive as her undergraduate courses. And she put this little note here. This reflects a year in which I moved to the graduate multivariate statistics course midway through the semester, right? Just so you know, this weird thing happened. And so again, she's using that cover sheet to put this experience into context and to help her readers understand what had happened. And the last thing that you need to understand about faculty is that they are presented with a big pile of these. So the more help you can give them understanding what you've done, the better. And thinking about faculty as your primary readers. Some faculty, as I've already told you, don't deal with numbers a lot. So when Bethany provides her standard deviation, if this was in a literature department, they would have no idea what to do with that. So you can think about what you want to present to your readers and how you want to help them understand your numbers as well. And that's another really useful thing to remember from that third tip about the situation that faculty are in. Situation number 3, you don't have any teaching evaluations. Now, it's possible you don't have any teaching evaluations because you haven't done your TAing yet, in which case they're going to come. But I'm going to imagine here in this situation number 3, either you TA'd and your class was not evaluated for a host of different reasons. You taught a class, and again, it wasn't evaluated for a number of different reasons. There's lots of reasons why evaluations don't work, or they don't run evaluations for very small classes and things like that. Or you never got a chance to be a TA or a teacher, and now what do you do? So tip number 4, There are lots of different ways to show teaching effectiveness, but you may have to take some extra steps in this situation. So if your application is due tomorrow and you don't have time to do anything else, try to include list of workshops that you've gone to. If you've gone to Center for Teaching and Learning workshops, list out those. And if you don't remember the ones you went to, CTL has that list and we're happy to help you out with that. Any that you went to in your department where people were talking about teaching. If you've gone to academic conferences and attended panels where people talked about teaching, include all of those. And don't just say like, when I was at the Modern Language Association, I went to go see some panels on teaching. Use the titles. And if you possibly can, talk about how your teaching might have changed or how your ideas about teaching might change as a result of attending those things. You can certainly provide that list. If you have, professors who you've talked with about teaching, encourage them to include the conversations that you've had about teaching in their letters about you. There's lots of different things that you can do. So the other thing that you can do if the job application is not due like tomorrow, please feel free to ask to do a guest lecture and get some feedback from that. So talk to someone on your committee, talk to your director, talk to friends who are TAing, talk to anybody who's got a class and say, hey, can I come in and do a guest lecture? Could I just do 20 minutes or whatever? See if you can come in and do a guest lecture or some kind of guest teaching activity. And then if you do that, make sure there are people there who can provide something that's going to help you. So ask the instructor teaching the course to observe you and ask them to write a letter. Ask your dissertation director or somebody who's going to be writing a letter to observe you. You can also ask CTL to come in and observe you. We can't write a letter, but you can reflect in your materials on the process. So you can talk about like, as a result of getting this CTL sort of feedback, I have done this, or I'm thinking about doing this for my future classes. You can also, in these guest teaching experiences, give students a short evaluation form to fill out. You can do it on paper right there, just hand it out to the students and ask them to give it back to you anonymously, and you can collate those answers and create some kind of official looking thing. You can also get people to use Google Forms. You can get them to use Qualtrics. It's also possible to embed a Canvas quiz and keep that Canvas quiz anonymous. So you can get that if the person teaching the class has a Canvas site and they're willing to let you like sort of give students this kind of a quiz. There's lots of different ways to get some feedback on your teaching that isn't the official Penn evaluation form. So don't give up, but you will have to take some extra steps. The last thing I want to tell you, tip number one, read the advertisement. And that's good for no matter what you're doing for getting jobs. It's like, look at the advertisement, look at what they're asking for, make sure that you give them what they're asking for in terms, not just of like, sort of the actual materials, but if they're saying, we want you to teach a certain kind of course, you say, I can teach that course. I'm looking forward to it. Tip number two, have a cover sheet that puts your evaluations into context. Give people a short summary that tells them what they're going to see. That saves them time, and it also allows you to shape their response to your evaluations. Tip number three, remember your audience. Faculty have all had terrible evaluations, and it's not going to knock you out of the process if your evaluations are not great. Tip number four, remember there are other ways to reflect evidence of teaching effectiveness.